Am I allowed to make jokes for this video? Is it too soon? We're allowed to laugh away the pain, right? It's what Ace would have wanted. In that case, can you believe Ace died because a man blew his back out? It's been over 10 years, guys. Come on. I think we're allowed to have a little fun. I say with a tear in my eye because the pain never fades. Podcast D. Ace sure is a character. At this point in time, he hasn't even been alive for over half of One Piece's ongoing story. And yet, he still has a fan base that's stronger than ever. Ace fans are some of the most active and insane fans I've ever encountered. And I mean that with a lot of love, because there's truly something beautiful about the attachment a person has to this guy. Hell, I even know Ace fans who haven't read the majority of One Piece because they're in it for just Ace. I literally cannot fault a person for that. If you love a character, you love a character. Sometimes the One Piece was the flaming men we found along the way, or something like that. And considering the introduction this guy had as a mysterious cloaked figure that was looking for Luffy, to getting squashed into Smoker's big juicy boobies, just for us to discover he's Luffy's similarly goofy big brother.
Yeah.
How could there not be a fascination in his being and character? There were plenty of questions with him. One of the main ones being, if he's Luffy's brother, why is he not a monkey? Who is this Portgaz? But of course, if you've been around One Piece's bend, you start realizing blood relation is not everything. Unless it is everything. Don't worry about it, you wouldn't get it anyways. My point is, there's a reason Ace hit that certain niche with a lot of people. He was fascinating and he was fun, but most importantly, he had this deeper level of his character that itched at the hearts of many watchers. Because usually, when a person is just into a single character and not the whole story, I would blame that on the story not being good enough. Yet, you all know how I feel about One Piece, and that's not the case with this series at all. Ace is just special in that regard. And he touched on a topic and feeling so many people can relate to and understand. So parting with Ace in the story was painful. While I may not be Ace's #1 fan, it was still painful. One Piece is just as much a character story as it is an adventure story. And Ace's departure leaving a hole in all of our hearts is a testament to just how fantastic the characters of this story are. The hole left in Ace was bigger though, you know, because of that. What I am going to get into today is, you guessed it, Ace. I will be talking about his character as a whole, the impact he still has in One Piece's story, and why he still has a dedicated fan base to this very day. But before I do that, it's sponsor time! While we cannot all be pirates in our current day and age, we can still be pirates online, and we can do that safely with Atlas VPN. If you're not a tech nerd like me and have no idea what a VPN is, a VPN makes it so all your internet searches, browsing, and history is completely protected. It's sure to hide your IP address and keeps you safe from spying, especially from the pesky FBI agent in your computer who's watching you look up Zoro's big fat boobies as we speak. But Atlas VPN isn't just a VPN, it also protects you from pop-up ads and malicious malware. It can also give you access to any country's version of Netflix or multiple other streaming services. I mentioned Netflix specifically because did you guys know multiple One Piece movies are on Australian Netflix? And with Atlas, you, yes you, can take advantage of Atlas's huge discount. You can get a 3-year subscription from $1.70 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Even better than that, if you use my link in the description below, you get an 86% discount for premium subscription. Snatch that deal while it's hot, and thank you so much Atlas VPN for sponsoring this video. I won't let you down. Alright everyone, it's time to jump into the burning flames of Portgas D. Ace. Now before I actually begin, I'm just going to say I won't be including Ace's novel because Oda didn't write it. I think he just supervised it. When I make these videos, as far as I'm concerned, the manga is the word of God. I say, as I also include the anime sometimes. Anyways, as I previously said, said, Ace's introduction was one cloaked in mystery. We didn't see his face, we didn't know his intentions, and we had no idea who he was. Because at the time, we didn't even know Luffy had a brother. So he was a little bit scary, honestly. But when we first really see him, it's face down in a pile of food, possibly dead. Hey, is this foreshadowing? Honestly, the entirety of Ace's introduction in Alabasta was one of the funniest pieces of slapstick One Piece has. From Ace being smushed in Smoker's tits because of Luffy, to both of them flying through a wall, to Smoker literally shoving Ace into the ground. There's a few scenes I belly laughed at, and this was definitely one of them. Oda has this fantastic knack at flipping us on our heads by holding back as much information as he can about a character, just to present them in full ages later and make us go, oh my god, they're an idiot. Because what we realize from all this is that Ace is goofy as hell. So when it's revealed Ace is Luffy's older brother, the collective audience reaction has to be, well, of course he is. Only someone related to Luffy would scoff down food at a rapid pace just to fall asleep midway through. Also, before I keep going, because I know a few people probably wouldn't know this, the symbol on Ace's back in the beginning of the manga is not what you think it is. This is meant to be a manji, not a swastika in a hateful or anti-Semitic context. The manji is originally a Buddhist symbol that symbolizes peace, which is what it's most known for in Asian regions and cultures. But because of what we associate this symbol with, it was changed for the general global audience. I'd say it's a bit of a shame, because Whitebeard's symbol meaning peace holds a lot more implications than just a skull and crossbones. But it was ultimately a decision that needed to be made so people wouldn't whip their heads around at what the hell was on Ace's back. Maybe they could have changed it to a hippie peace sign, wouldn't that have been funny? Anyways, I just had to get that out of the way so I could show these early manga chapters. So, up to this point, the only person we know from Luffy's past was Shanks. Shanks was the end-all be-all of Luffy's pirate inspiration and goals in regards to taking to the sea, which is why when we meet Ace, there's a whole new dynamic and reasoning thrown into the mix. Because Ace isn't just Luffy's brother, he's also a fellow pirate, one who seems to be notorious and powerful in his own right, and one who, we discover, was constantly in competition with Luffy. You know how it is with brothers. It's quite obvious that Ace is another driving force for Luffy's goals and ambitions. Shanks is great and all, but it's not like Luffy could ever be in competition with Shanks. He's the end goal, after all, so who's the one standing with Luffy, pushing him to be better and become stronger while traveling across the ocean? That's Ace, of course. It's incredibly Big Brother-like, and as a younger sibling myself, I do feel that connection with Luffy. A big brother, or a good one, is someone you look up to. Due to being older, you see them reach milestones in life before yourself, and that works as a motivation to reach your own milestones as a younger sibling. It's not the same for all siblings by any means, but this is my own experience, and it's definitely what Ace is written to be in Luffy's eyes. Ace feeling that older brother role was a fantastic decision, and one that Luffy really needed. Ace didn't just exist as a surprise sibling, he existed as a legitimate connection and influence in Luffy's own life and character. This influence being a lot more meaningful and powerful the more we see of him, but I'll be getting to that. Now, within Alabasta, the anime made an interesting decision decision of including Ace along a portion of Luffy's travels. In the manga, Ace pops up, says hi to Luffy, shows off his flames, and thanks the Straw Hats for looking out for Luffy. Then he's gone. We don't get much of him. The anime showed us not only more of Ace, but allowed Ace to observe the Straw Hats and Luffy's crew a lot more. You know, like really observe. It's subjective on whether or not this inclusion was a good one. While there were some filler episodes that may have dragged Alabasta out, I don't feel Ace overstayed his welcome by any means. My humble opinion is, I feel Ace sticking around for a little bit was a good idea, because when Ace actually gets to watch the Straw Hats, and when he actually spends time with Luffy, his farewell felt a lot more impactful. Not only does Ace thanking the Straw Hats really seem genuine after all this, but telling Luffy he's the type of little brother to make a big brother worry just comes off a lot sweeter and sincere in Alabasta's setting sun. To me it did anyways, but both the anime and manga did a good job with it. We only see Ace a little bit more after this. For some reason he meets Buggy. Considering Buggy's connection with Whitebeard and Roger, I find this bittersweet. Ace seems to continuously meet people with connections to Roger, whether personally or by word of mouth. And no doubt Roger would have had a laugh at his blood son meeting his clown son. But look at me, getting sappy. Sorry, let me push those emotions aside. Something very noticeable about Ace and his character is, while he's very similar to Luffy in a few regards, he's a lot more polite. Ace will bow to thank people, apologize for causing any disturbances, and just uses manners in general. Again, this is a showing of the maturity difference between an older brother and a little brother. During early One Piece, Luffy definitely had a much more impulsive and rude nature about him, so Ace's mannerisms greatly stand out to Luffy's own. There are multiple reasons for this, but once more, I will be getting to that. The point of all this is Ace wasn't around too much, especially not at the beginning, but he certainly had a big impression. Ace was Luffy's older brother who held the power of flames. He was a leader on Whitebeard's crew, and he glided around the Grand Line on a tiny sailboat like it was nothing. Ace was fascinating for his connections and his power. By all means, the sea felt like his. I can't say I formed a strong connection with him at this point, as my own connection leaned more heavily towards Luffy, because, again, younger siblings. But I can understand why Ace grabbed the brains of many from here, since he just seems like a genuinely good guy. At the risk of making a pun, there's a warmth about him. From Ace's care of Luffy, to his sincerity towards the Straw Hats, to his honest smile, there's certainly something enticing about him. It's hard not to like him. And even if you don't particularly care about him, he still holds an interest. But one thing you can count on with One Piece is it will expand on a character. Whether that's in a good way or not, who knows? And Ace definitely got one of the most gut-wrenching, heartbreaking reveals a character could get. Because on the surface, it was shocking. But when we're forced to dig deeper, when we're made to see the ins and outs of Ace's life, that's when it really hurts. Let's finally talk about Marineford and Ace's connection to Goldie Roger. Everything started with the reveal of Ace's execution. A reveal in the middle of probably some of the worst days of Luffy's life. Not only had Luffy's crew been sent to who knows where, Luffy was forced to be on his own while discovering his brother had been sentenced to death. This entire arc was painful because through the whole thing, Ace was always just out of reach. Luffy moved as fast as he could, and yet Ace was only at the edge of his fingertips, until one moment in particular, and we all know how that turned out, but we'll get to that. Now, a conversation Ace has while imprisoned, and and something I feel is pretty heavily forgotten about is what he says while talking to Garp. Because something I see a lot, or I guess hear a lot, is that Ace did this to himself. Ace chose to be a pirate, so this was on him. Ace could have made something different of his life, yet he didn't. And now his head is on the chopping block. This is a path Ace took, and this is a path Ace must accept. If Ace went about his life differently, none of this would be happening. I entirely disagree with this sentiment, and I truly don't think that's what Ace's story is about at all. The conversation Ace has with Garp tells us exactly why this is happening, and exactly why Ace was always bound to end up in chains. Garp essentially reprimands Ace for these exact same reasons. Garp tells Ace he wanted better for him, that he wanted Ace to be a Marine, but Ace ended up disobeying him and becoming a criminal. But it's what Ace says back that hits home, and honestly shows Garp is pretty set in his old ways to a point it's a fault. Ace says to Garp, "The fact we both have world-class criminal blood flowing through our veins, there's no way we could ever have been accepted into the Navy." When Ace says this, we have no idea who his father is, but that line hits tenfold once the reveal is forced upon not only us, but the world of One Piece. And considering how hard Ace fights to stop it from happening, we can bet this is a source of trauma for Ace. And oh boy, was it a bombshell.
お前の父親は海賊王ゴールド・ロジャーだ。
The reactions from the crowd, the Marines, from the world in general tells us all we need to know. Up to Marineford, we knew virtually nothing of Gold D. Roger. We only had Rayleigh's word, and while to us Roger may not have seemed the worst, the world of One Piece found him detestable. Roger was a man labeled the most dangerous person in the world. He was a man the Marines worked endlessly to stop, who everyone was told to be afraid of, and who started the age of piracy. Hence, this is why Ace's words to Garp hit harder, because Ace is right. Whether or not Luffy would be accepted as a Marine, that's up for debate. Dragon is Luffy's father, but Luffy is also Garp's grandson. Who knows how the Marines truly feel about Luffy with Garp still in their ranks. But Ace, the king of pirates, Gold D. Roger is the vein of both the Marines and the world government's existence. Roger is seen as the biggest threat this world has ever had. He's seen as a demon and a devil, to the point the Marines were even hunting down pregnant women and, although implied, harming them to make sure Roger's blood was extinguished from the world. With a threat as big as Roger, there's no way his next of kin would ever be accepted into any form of Marine or government, because that's the point of Ace. He's cursed by birth and by blood. Whether Ace chose his own path or not, he was always limited on who he could be and where he could go. And this is due to the fact thousands upon thousands wanted him dead for his existence alone, no matter what he did. So when a young Ace spoke to Garp, when he asked Garp if he should have even been born, his response comes off somewhat tone deaf. Garp's response to a literal child asking if he should have ever been born is literally, only time can answer that question. As we know, Garp constantly pushed for these kids to become Marines. Hence, this is Garp trying to force Ace on a path of his idea of justice. But again, Ace's choices are limited in what he can and can't be. And it really feels like Garp doesn't understand the struggles this kid is facing. Because in Garp's eyes, Ace can make up for his cursed blood by working for the Marines. Marines. Ace can make use of his life by atoning for the sins of his father, except we know the Marines would not see it this way. Ace knows the Marines won't see it this way. So instead of this answer directing Ace onto any path of lawful justice, it made him believe he needed to find an answer himself away from those who detested him. Once again, the question Ace asked was if he should have ever been born. So why the hell would he go into a system that shoves in his face time and time again that he's a demon spawn who should have never existed in the first place? On the seas, he doesn't have to constantly hide who he is. We discover that as a child, Ace was questioning his own life. The adults around him would badmouth him to his face, would talk about how they'd torture Roger's child if he ever had one, and this understandably disconnected Ace from the world around him. That is, until he met Luffy. The backstory we receive upon Ace's passing is the childhood he had with Luffy. I used to wonder why we received Ace's story after the Summit War, but in the same way Oda waited years to give us Sanji's whole story, he wanted to show us the ugliest parts of Ace before giving us the explanation for it all. Because when we watch the Summit War, there's a frustration. There's an anger for why Ace didn't back out, for why Ace turned around, and for why Ace couldn't hold back his pride to escape in the moment. And what Ace's story tells us is this wasn't a showing of pride. In fact, Ace's death, with the understanding of his story, is so much more tragic than a stubbornness of character, especially with Luffy standing right behind him. When first meeting each other, Ace hated Luffy. He even spat on him, which is so funny to me because they hadn't even met yet. I'd say what is his problem, but we kind of know at this point. Luffy, being Luffy, attaches himself to Ace and follows Ace everywhere to try and get his recognition. Very younger sibling core, I must say. It's here we're introduced to Sabo, and at first I was surprised at Ace even having any friends at all. But Sabo ends up being a bigger stability in Ace's life than I previously thought. Ace and Sabo threaten to kill Luffy due to Luffy discovering their secret stash of money, a stash they plan to use to become pirates. And Luffy's screaming alerts some pirates in the area. Pirates that Ace stole from and who Luffy knew Ace stole from. So they hold Luffy hostage. Luffy, as a child, gets brutally beaten and tortured by these pirates, demanding to know where Ace is. Once Ace and Sabo save Luffy from these men, Luffy cries that he was scared and he thought he was going to die, until Ace tells him to shut up. And this whole conversation reveals exactly where Ace's deep love and protection towards Luffy comes from. Ace asks Luffy why he didn't just confess to the pirates where the treasure was, considering they would have killed Luffy if he hadn't. And Luffy says, if I told them, I couldn't be your friend anymore. Enraged, Ace yells back, so what? It's better than dying. Why do you want to be friends with me anyways? And Luffy hits back with, because I've got nobody else. Ace is understandably taken aback by this, so he asks about Luffy's parents, to which Luffy responds he doesn't have any. And Ace then proceeds to ask some of what I think is the saddest questions a 10-year-old could ask. So, you feel better around me. You need me. Do you want me to be alive? Again, this is a 10-year-old. A 10-year-old asking another kid if they want him to be alive. I'm relaying this scene almost word for word because this moment here, this discussion between Ace and Luffy is what really solidifies their bond. Ace did horrible things to Luffy, left him to die and left him to fend for himself. But Luffy still wanted Ace's approval. Luffy still saw worth in Ace because he simply liked him. The only person Ace was nice to at this point was Sabo, and that's because he thought Sabo to also have been abandoned and alone, which becomes a lot more of a personal bond once discovering Sabo is also a child defined by his blood father. But that happens later on. Anyways, when he was alone, Ace asked Garp if he should have ever been born. Garp's answer essentially was that he needs to prove it. Maybe if Ace makes something of his life, then that question can be answered. But Luffy, who was only a child, is basically asked the same question. Ace asks Luffy if he wants him to be alive, and Luffy immediately answers with a confident, "Of course." With all the horrible things Ace had done to Luffy up to this point, how could he not form an immediate attachment to this weird little kid? Luffy had been taken hostage for Ace, had been punched with spikes for Ace, had been spat on and left behind by Ace, and he was still happy Ace existed. Ace knew that his blood didn't matter. At least, not to Luffy. Ace didn't need to prove his worth to Luffy because, in true Luffy fashion, Luffy is just happy with Ace existing. He didn't need a reason for why Ace treated him the way he did, and that was plenty enough of a reason for Ace to start treasuring Luffy as a little brother. A few chapters later, we're met with another scene of Ace confronting the pirate who tied up and hurt Luffy. But this time, with their newfound connection, we see a lot more ferocity in Ace's actions. When Ace confronts the pirate Blue Jam, telling Luffy that Luffy's life is more important than his own, he yells that he refuses to run away, because he will never run away. When making it back to safety, Deden asks why Ace has such a bad habit, and Ace's answer is honestly heartbreaking to me. Sometimes I get so angry and I feel like if I run away, I'll lose something I could never get back. And this time, Luffy was behind me. This single answer is what makes everything click into place. It's even hammered home with Garp explaining how Roger used to act, telling us that Roger was especially afraid of losing his loved ones, because to Roger, it wasn't about pride alone, but the fear of endangering his friends if he ever turned his back on the enemy. And this is exactly why Ace acted the way he did in the Summit War. Yes, Akainu made fun of Whitebeard, his captain. Yes, Ace was reckless in his decision to turn around, but it had nothing to do with the pride of Whitebeard or the pride of his own being, because in my opinion, it's hard to say if Ace even had a pride of self. During the Summit War, Luffy was right behind him. Luffy is a captain in his own right. He can look after himself, but Luffy is all Ace has. Luffy is the only little brother Ace got. And this fight, with Akainu mocking Whitebeard and aiming directly for Luffy, wasn't a moment of idiocy for Ace. It was a moment of total rage and a moment of total passion. Ace refusing to turn his back was a pure act of love. Perhaps he was a fool for it, but to turn this moment into nothing but, well, Ace was an idiot for that, does a total disservice to Ace's life and character. In saying that, I haven't even talked about Whitebeard yet, mainly because, as I said many times already, I feel a much deeper connection with the bond between Ace and Luffy. But Whitebeard was just as much Ace's savior as Luffy was. When Ace was a child, he claimed he'd prove his life is worth something. No matter how many people in the world hated him, he'd fight against them to find a place for himself. Enter Edward Newgate. I can't say I understand how Whitebeard works, but he obviously has a trauma detector somewhere on him, because he took one look at Ace to figure out this was just a broken boy in need of a home. To begin with, Ace completely rejected Whitebeard, and this is in an extremely similar sense he rejected Luffy. Ace was violent towards Whitebeard, disapproving of Whitebeard, and a total brat towards a literal emperor of the sea. Seeing Ace's rejection of Whitebeard is a mirror of his 10-year-old self. They even both have that evil little look in their eyes. Similar to Luffy, Ace forms a bond with Whitebeard due to the fact he did all these terrible things to Whitebeard, and Whitebeard still accepted him. But the nail in the coffin was Marco comforting Ace on the Whitebeard ship, and Marco's response when Ace asked him why they all accepted Whitebeard as their father. here. Marco says to him, because he considers us his sons. We're just a bunch of strays here, so it makes us feel good whether he really means it or not. And Ace's face here is just unbelievably harrowing, mostly because he looks like he's trying not to cry. This is a boy who has been rejected his entire life by the world around him, his only saving grace and family being Luffy. But Whitebeard, the supposed rival of his blood father, has taken him aboard as his son. It feels as if Ace just can't understand why anyone would want him, especially in a space Ace hasn't carved out for himself. But suddenly he's found himself amongst a large, if unconventional, family. And when Ace tells Whitebeard who his father really is, Whitebeard laughs and tells him, "That's nothing. I don't care who your father was." How incredibly Luffy-like. While I can't say Whitebeard and Luffy mirror each other as characters completely, in regards to their feelings and their love for Ace, it's pretty one-to-one. Both of them went through similar trials to gain Ace's affection, and both of them fought tooth and nail to get him back. This is definitely why Whitebeard felt a fondness towards Luffy upon meeting him, and it's also why Whitebeard was prepared to die if it meant getting both Ace and Luffy out alive. And Whitebeard's speech upon Ace's death, more than just the One Piece being real, don't worry, I'm not going to show the meme, holds a lot more purpose than just refueling the pirate age. This speech was not just for the world, but was for his sons, and was for Luffy to hear. The words that stick out to me the most being, "Someone will inherit Ace's will. You can sever bloodlines, but flames will never be extinguished." He's essentially saying that Gold D. Roger might be dead, that his last of kin may have been wiped out, but that means nothing. The bond Luffy and Ace have, not as blood but as chosen brothers, is stronger than any familial connection. And he's right. In his final moments, Ace watched those he loved the most fight for him. As a child, Ace told Luffy he hates crybabies. But as he watches the war before him, he can't help but sob in a range of conflicting emotions, because he can't stand to see anyone die for him. But at the same time, he's watching people want to die for him. Going from a child, hearing any random person wanting him dead, to an adult experiencing hundreds of people fight for him to exist, can only be excruciatingly bittersweet. And when Luffy holds him in his arms, when Ace is crying into his shoulder that he would have given up if it weren't for Luffy, we get Ace's last words, shot like a bullet through both our hearts and Luffy's own.
今日までこんなどうしようもねえ俺を鬼の血を引くこの俺をありがとう
Thank you for loving me. Ace didn't take to the seas for fame. Ace didn't brave the ocean for power or wealth. He had no desire to be the Pirate King. He had no fantastical dream to truly chase. All he wanted was to know if he had worth. All he wanted was to know if he was loved. And while it was devastating, Ace's wish had been met, which is why he dies with a smile on his face. The biggest tragedy with Ace is he was met with this realization so late in his life. Because while he didn't know it and while he didn't feel it, even his own parents loved him so much. Roger loved him to the point he begged Garp to look after his, at the time, unborn son. Roger had no one else to turn to and no one else he could trust in the moment, apart from an enemy who chased him down relentlessly. Even in his last moments, Roger still swallowed his pride to ask for the safety of his son. And of course, Ace's mother loved him so much that she gave her own life for him. Rouge knew the risk of holding the Pirate King's child, and even with that risk, she did all she could could to keep him safe. While Ace did not feel his parents' love, they still loved him more than anyone could possibly say. And while he grew, Ace encountered people like Dodon, like Sabo, like Luffy, Whitebeard, Otama, and Yamato, who all treasured him so much that they still hold him in their hearts. Ace growing to hate Roger as his father is especially so upsetting, because when he talks with Yamato, Yamato recites Odin's journal to him. Yamato tells Ace that Odin spoke of a great man, and Ace's response to that is, "A great man? I like the sound of that. I would love to have a drink with him and Luffy someday." Yamato never told Ace who he was talking about, but we know this was about Roger. And doesn't that just make your heart ache? When Ace is given tales of Roger's life and being without mention of name, Ace clearly has some admiration for him. And God, does that just hurt? Look, to sum this all up, Ace is an extremely tragic character. But more than that, more than the pain Ace went through, we are also constantly reminded of the life and love Ace managed to find and receive. And Whitebeard's words really ring louder now more than ever. The final act of the first saga ended with Ace. It ended with his death and his love for Luffy. But now we've just finished the final act of the second saga, WANO. And more than Kaido, more than Odin, more than WANO as a whole, this act was also about Ace. Not just Ace's life, but Ace's influence on the world and people around him. Whitebeard yelled that someone would pick up Ace's will, that his flames will never be extinguished, and Luffy is certainly the one keeping those flames burning bright. The contrast of Luffy breaking down at Ace's death in the ending of the first saga, to Luffy smiling at Marco once being told Ace would be proud of him at the end of the second saga, truly shows why Ace and One Piece as a whole is so unique. Ace wasn't around for long, but that doesn't matter. One Piece makes sure we'll never forget Ace's life, we'll never forget his flames, and we'll never forget just how much everyone loved him, because Ace's point, his story, and his character was about love. As the saying goes, to be loved is to be changed, and we see that with Ace through and through. To go from a closed-off child with a perpetual scowl to an adult who smiled as warm as the sun, dying with such a smile on his face, is why he touches the hearts of so many. Ace, more than anyone, tells us we're allowed to be loved. No matter our connections, our problems, our rejection, we are still deserving of love. Love is not something to be earned. It's not something to be deserved. And yet, he still thanks everyone for loving him, because without that love, he doesn't know who he'd be. He doesn't know where he'd be. And he can feel a meaning and a worth for being alive. While Ace may be gone, he still remains beloved both in story and in the real world. And that is an exceptionally powerful example of just how impactful Ace truly was. And with that, thanks for watching. Sorry if this felt like a huge rant of a video. I was very nervous for this one because I know just how much people love Ace and I really wanted to capture why. Ace isn't my favorite character, but he's still a character I really respect and appreciate a lot. And every time I make these types of videos, I prioritize why the character in question is a favorite for so many people. In saying that, let me know what you think. Is Ace your favorite? If so, tell me why. I love reading the comments and getting different opinions. Just a quick reminder that I do have a Patreon, and if you would like to support me there, I'd really appreciate it. However, I know not everyone can support me in that way, and watching and sharing these videos does more than you can imagine for me. My Patreon also includes how to get into my Discord, which I always forget to mention. But I do have a Discord, so there you go. If there's anything you'd like to see me cover, One Piece or otherwise, please let me know. And I'll see you in whatever I make next. See ya!